Academy, the only show dedicated to putting 10,000 new lifters on the platform in 2012. I am Nick Horton.
Michael Hartman.
And you are not in your office today.
No, I'm in a office, but not my office. We're at my day job of university professor. We get spring break, so one of the perks is spring break for the rest of my life. And so wife
That's
and
a good
I,
perk, man.
yeah. Summer's off, and all right. Best things about teaching. Three best things: June, July, August, right? But you can throw in a spring break. And wife and I took the little guy visiting the in-laws. So
Yeah.
out of the office, and I'm in their office now today.
Oh, that's awesome. Nice. You said Tulsa, Oklahoma, right?
Also, just a couple hours from Fort Worth.
That's actually where my grandparents were born and grew up. Was in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Nice, see that? We have a connection.
Look at that.
You know about that.
Yep. Yeah, my grandmother apparently got thrown off a horse over there, so there's a connection. So we thought we'd get a little coachy on you, because coaches, we do that, and we'd get a little more into the depth into some, maybe over the next few episodes into some coaching related topics. And I think it was Charles Dickens who said the best place to start is at the beginning. So why don't we go over a little about what happens the very first day a brand new lifter comes in the gym who maybe doesn't know anything, and then you'd said maybe also talk about what might happen differently if, let's say, we had a CrossFitter coming in they've been kind of doing the lifts, but maybe not the way a weightlifter would do them.
Or maybe anybody that
or anybody who's football player or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know, like what's like day one look like for you with somebody coming in the gym?
I think the first thing is, you talk to them, figure out what they're training for and why they're there. And once all that kind of gets out of the way and they're ready to get on the platform, the very first thing I like to do is I like to see them just pick up a bar and do something with it, right? And if they kind of approach the bar where, well, I don't know about this, or they just kind of pick it up and they're ready to do something, that's a very, very good sign. But I'd say 9 times out of 10, I'll always teach the snatch before I teach the clean or before I teach the jerk. And
Okay.
I figure if you can get the snatch out of the way, it doesn't mean everything else is going to be easy, but it's a very quick little test to see if they have the flexibility to put the bar overhead. If they have the flexibility to get into a deep squat position with the bar overhead is a plus. So I typically always start with the snatch, and probably the first thing we do is I explain the snatch, and then I show them the snatch grip. I don't make it overly complicated. I know some coaches have a kind of a sophisticated formula of figuring out exactly how wide your grip should be in the snatch.
You pull out a protractor.
Yeah, exactly. And they'll measure from the spine out to the length of their arm. And I take the eyeball approach, and I say, okay, pick up this bar, hold it with this wide snatch grip, and looking basically for the bar to come into contact with the crease of the hip.
Right.
And I think that's just a very good eyeball test. And it really allows you to, if you have a tall guy or you have a shorter girl or somebody that has kind of unusually long arms, you can kind of figure out where, based on that grip, where position as it hits the body, where it needs to be. And then I guess probably the next thing is having them put that bar overhead and either attempt to do an overhead squat or just get it overhead. And depending how that goes, that kind of sets the stage for everything else. But in your experience, do you typically teach the snatch first, or have you?
Oh, yeah, I definitely teach the snatch first. In fact,
Yep.
Over the last few years, I've gotten more and more fanatic about how long I make people snatch before I let them clean.
Sure.
Like, it used to be like we kind of do both the same day.
Yep.
Just kind of playing around with both.
Yep.
And then I kind of, maybe the first day we'll do snatch and the second day we'll do cleans. And now it's closer to like, well, I'm going to have you snatch for a month, and I'm not going to even let you clean.
Yep.
Until I'm totally confident that you've at least got down the ultra basics that I'm looking for in the snatch.
Sure.
It's totally, so, okay, remember the 2000 elections when there was that debacle, Al Gore and
hanging chads.
The hanging chads and all that. Not the hanging Chad Vaughns. That's totally different. No. I stayed up with a buddy of mine all night long, assuming it was going to end anytime, right? Because I'm into politics a lot. It's just kind of fun. I like the game of it all, right? So I I was kind of excited. I was watching it. We had our popcorn, and we were watching Dan Rather. And Dan Rather, all night long, he stayed up all night long, waiting for some sort of conclusion, and spouting off ridiculous sayings. I think at some point or another he was just making stuff up to keep people watching.
Sure.
But one of the things he said that stuck with me was, maybe I've said this before, but I'll say it again. If you have to eat a plate of frogs, eat the biggest ones first.
Yeah.
And and that makes sense, right? That's like saying, well, it's the big rocks theory that if you're gonna fill a jar with rocks, you got to put the big ones in first and then pour the pebbles on top, or otherwise the big rocks won't fit.
Sure.
Same idea. And I think the snatch is like the big frog.
Yeah.
It's definitely a more complicated lift. It's a scarier lift. Even though it's less weight than a clean, I mean, it's a lot less scary to catch a clean on your shoulder than it is to catch a snatch overhead, especially when you're first starting. And maybe, a year or two in, the clean starts to become scarier because of the weight involved. For some lifters, but I think definitely in the beginning, the idea of getting into a full overhead squat,
Yeah.
even with an empty bar,
And putting it there fast too.
putting it there fast. Yeah, I mean that.
Not just kind of letting it slide up your body and pushing it up there, but you're literally throwing it over your head.
Yeah.
I think that's a
Right.
scary thing for a lot of people.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's that level of dynamic movement into such a weirdo position is understandably and I think objectively scary. I mean, it makes sense why people would be like that. You crazy.
Sure.
So getting that out of the way and dealing with that.
I think that the big rock or the big frog example is perfect, right? I really do. I think, again, it's not a 100% success rate that if somebody can get into an overhead squat, that they're not going to have any trouble putting the bar overhead in the jerk or racking a bar in the clean. But there's a really high probability that if you can do that, or let's put it this way, going the other way, if you can't put a bar overhead and do an overhead squat, we know there's going to be other issues we have to address. Yeah. So let's address that one first, and that will make everything else easier from here on out.
Yeah, on that point, do you do any kind of other types of assessment for a lifter? Like I know, like in other outside of Olympic lifting, a lot of strength and conditioning coaches are into like the functional movement screens or this kind of stuff, to sort of test out, well, what are the problems I'm dealing with right now with this new lifter that I need to fix? Or do you kind of use the teaching of the snatch as a de facto functional movement screen?
I think that's probably a good way to put it. I use the teaching of the snatch as my screen. And at one time, I used to teach the front squat first. I thought that if I could teach somebody how to do a front squat, that was going to be everything else. And you know what? I kind of go back and forth with that sometimes, but I'd say lately it's, like I said, 9 out of 10, it's always the snatch. But I used the front squat previously the same way I use the snatch now, in that if you can't front squat, what makes me think you're ever going to be able to clean? And if you can't overhead squat, what leads me to believe then that you're going to be able to snatch? Yeah. And obviously, it's you can catch a snatch on straight legs and not have to overhead squat it at all. But no, I definitely use that in the teaching.
We might make fun of you though.
Yeah. Or you're just really, really powerful and you don't have to bench the legs. But no, I use the snatch as kind of my own poor man's functional movement screen. I've been through the FMS before, and they use the overhead squat as one of the 7 tests. So I think there's some good reason for using that overhead squat position. But I guess I made the comment about picking up the bar first, and depending who the individual is, and maybe it's just I give people too much credit sometimes, but a lot of times I'll start people right on a 20K bar. Sure. But if I know it's somebody who's not going to be strong enough or somewhat intimidated, we start with a wooden dowel. And I think that's, we don't spend that much time with it, but I think the wooden dowel it's very light, it's the right length, it's the right diameter.
And it's not at all scary.
Not at all scary. So it's like I show them, you can pick up this wooden dowel and you can do anything you want with it. So let's just put it here and then try to squat. And then, just the little things I look for, that if they have trouble just, locking their elbows and putting the bar, overhead into a good position, we work on that. So maybe that means we do like a snatch balance or a drop snatch where you go from behind the back to overhead a couple times.
Sure.
But if they can get it overhead, I say, okay, go ahead and try to squat with it. And I watch, are they leaning too far forward? Are their knees caving in? Are they, unable to simultaneously keep the arms extended and squat down? And it's
Sure.
all just adjustments, It's I know you were just in Hawaii recently, and I've heard a story about that where when pilots leave from the West Coast, whether it's California or Portland, they basically spend half the time in the air just getting back on course. So the whole time, whatever winds or I'm not a meteorologist, but I'm sure there's some jet streams, and these planes are going off course, and the pilots just keep bringing them back to course. I
Uh-huh.
think that's probably a good way to describe how I coach, for the first couple sessions anyway, through the snatch and overhead squat. Like we just keep getting back on course, and if something goes wrong, then we adjust it and then we move on to the next thing.
Yeah, yeah, I like the course correction model. Right. That I think like you have a plan in your
Yep.
mind how things are going to go, uh, but it's not necessarily going to go that way. So you have to kind of just go with the flow with any particular lifter. It's interesting because I do a lot of seminars with like CrossFit clubs and things like that.
Sure.
That
Sure.
and what's tough about a seminar is that one, you have a lot of people all learning all at the same time. It's just me and a
Yep.
couple of my lifters trying to, you know, corral everybody. But two, you're condensing down like a month's worth of training into a few hours. And you have to go through it all. And you just have to
Sure.
accept the fact that a lot of these people, like they can barely overhead squat. It actually is kind of tough for them.
Yep.
So I don't have the luxury of saying, well, we're going to spend 3 days on mobility work or
Yep.
something like that, right? Like it's just too bad. You're going to have to deal with where you're at. And that's interesting. But in the gym, you know, you have such a luxury in that uh, you can do that exact thing. You can course correct. Whereas like a seminar, it's like here's the plan. We're going to go through it. We're just going to drill through everything, and I don't care where if you're falling off the edge because at some point or another, it's at that with that type of thing. It's really just here's the knowledge. You'll go back
Yep.
and work it on your own.
Yep.
I'm just going to try to give you as much as I can. But in the gym, it's not like that. I'm almost holding back knowledge and avoiding giving people too much information and
Sure.
keeping them, just on the one thing we're doing today. You're going to do this thing and we're going to get good at it. If that goes awry, we're going to make sure we don't move on until we pull you back. And that's I think what happens sometimes when people are teaching themselves,
Yep.
and I'm sure most people who are listening to this right now, that's exactly the position you're in, is that you are taking the seminar approach. You're trying to
And
gather too much knowledge and try
sure.
to apply all of it, and that's not really how learning works.
Yep.
You need to, it's okay to know what the plan is and have it out in front of you like a syllabus, and that's great. But you do have to kind of just stay at the one spot you're at until you've corrected yourself enough, and then you move to the
Sure.
next thing and you correct yourself enough.
It has to be a very flexible, you know, syllabus or even just a very flexible outline where you
Yeah,
may, in a best case scenario, this is what you want to do each day, but you have to spend the right time on different areas. And kind of going along with that, I teach different seminars here and there as well in the snatch, and I use the top down model. So I'll start from like I call it a hip snatch, and then we go to the hang snatch, and then maybe
sure.
hang below the knee, and then eventually we're off the platform. And
Right.
in some cases, if somebody has a little bit of experience coming in the first day they're in the gym, I can take them through all those progressions in 15, 20, 30 minutes. But for a lot of people, we may spend a week just from the hip.
Yeah.
We may spend another week or a week and a half going from the hang or the high hang or hang below the knee, and then eventually 2 weeks in, now we're finally going off the platform just
Sure.
because
Yeah.
of a flexibility issue or whatever some limitation where they're not getting their knees back. We have to spend time teaching that movement. But in a seminar, if somebody paid me or you to come do a 3 hour seminar on a snatch and we never got off the hip snatch, I think there'd be a lot of
Yeah.
angry customers. Or we spent 3 hours just on how to position the bar overhead.
I think it's
Uh,
already
a
a
lot
bit of a
of
struggle
wouldn't
in
be a lot of repeat business. But
right, right.
like you said, in practice though, if you're having somebody come in and the long term outlook of let's get this person very proficient in getting the bar overhead. So we may spend we may spend the whole day doing different types of snatch grip push presses and drop snatches and drop snatch plus overhead squat,
Sure. If
just so
that's
that
the
they're
thing that they need, yeah, that
use
particular
that.
person
But
needs,
in
yeah.
seminars, it's not always that possible. And I think you bring up a good point of where somebody goes and they go to a 2 hour seminar or a 3 hour seminar just on the snatch or both competition lifts, and then it goes very very quick. And if you have 20 people in the gym, um, as a teacher, I do this in the classroom all the time, and I know you do a similar approach where you kind of have to shoot the middle, right? You can't
Yeah.
teach the top 10%, you can't teach to the bottom 10%. You have to find that 80% in the middle, and that's who you're teaching to. So in the seminar approach, there's always going to be people who are struggling just to keep up, and there's always going to be people who are just kind of bored to tears because they already know this information. But
Yeah.
you have to kind of shoot somewhere in the middle so you're not losing too many people or boring too many people. But in the gym, if you're working one-on-one or even a small group of 2 or 3, you can really gauge it to the actual lifters there.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that um I don't know how you guys do it over there at Black Box. If I know some clubs they kind of split beginners up away from the more advanced lifters. Other clubs like mine, like that's not really even feasible, so we just kind of everybody's crammed into the same room.
Sure.
Um, uh, and so, like I've talked about this before, how it's not that I ignore my more advanced lifters, it's just that I don't have to pay as much attention until the weights get really heavy. Like I don't care about watching them warm up, like that's ridiculous. But there is an interesting thing I think from a coaching perspective. I think every coach or teacher in any situation uh, where they have a group, like you said, there's going to be pretty varied amounts of abilities, and in a gym, unlike say like a classroom, um, in a gym, you also have like different grade levels.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not even just abilities. It's like you have like the ninth graders with the fifth graders,
Sure.
all in the same. It's like a one room schoolhouse situation.
Yeah. That's exactly that's the best way to describe it. The one room schoolhouse approach.
Yeah, and that's just sort of what it is. You don't really have a choice here most of the time, unless you run like some gargantuan gym where you can actually split people off, and you got
Sure.
some coaches working with one group. I mean, for most of us, that's just not a realistic option. You are stuck with the one room schoolhouse model, for good or for ill. There is a good thing about it. I like it because my more advanced lifters automatically become like de facto coaches.
You have to, and that's part of if you want to learn something, you teach it to somebody else, and
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. So as as they're able to pass information down to the novice and beginner lifters, I think it helps them kind of perfect their craft. So
Yeah.
then now it's not just a matter of doing something; it's knowing how and why it happened, and then again teaching it to somebody else. I think that's an awesome model to have in the gym.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty nice. I do intentionally try to keep people of similar abilities on the same platform or bar if I can help it. But it's nice also, I think, to have the more advanced lifters in the same room lifting at the same time, in part just for like it raises the standard in the mind of the newer people. If they're just around each other, there's always going to be the big fish in the small pond scenario where somebody thinks they can kind of coast
Sure.
because
Or
they're the
60
best out of the
kilos
worst, right?
60 kilos becomes a big lift. If all you have are people, snatching, 40, 45, and 50, like that, the first person to 60, it's real big. But you have them on the platform around other people that are snatching, 110, 120.
Right.
It puts it all into perspective. It's like, well, 60 is a good starting point, but it's not the be all end all of the snatch.
Right, right. And of course, you're always going to have the top guy in the gym, right?
Yep.
Top girl in the gym, whatever it is. Uh, but, I think by the time you get to a certain level in lifting, you already have in your own mind, like, okay, well, these are, my real competition are the people out there,
Sure.
But I think for the first little while, uh, uh, I don't know, maybe 3 months to a year or something like that, it's very good to have people to chase who are right
Sure.
there in the gym. I think that's a really good thing. It certainly helped Brandon out to have a couple guys in the gym who are definitely a lot stronger than him. They're bigger
Sure.
than him,
Yep.
also. That's part of the reason they're stronger.
Yep.
But it made an enormous difference in his training to have his training partners be people who could outlift him every day.
Sure. No,
Yeah.
I think that's good. And again, it puts it in perspective and it gives you something to do. And I think it helps a little bit too when you have lifters of differing abilities. And maybe this is a good segue into our next thing. If somebody's coming from another sport or coming
Right.
from CrossFit, where they may be very strong in back squat or they may be very strong in the front squat, but they're just learning the clean or they're just learning the snatch, that you have them going through an entire session together, that when it gets to the squats, now they're even. So it gives that new person, you know what, I'm as strong as they are. I can squat more than they can or as much as they can. So it really lets them know, gives them some confidence in that it's
Yeah.
just a matter of time before your snatch weights come up to what to other people of similar ability are using.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. So do you have a different approach? Like if somebody comes in and they are a CrossFitter, maybe they play football in high school and so they've done a lot of power cleans or something
Sure.
else, if they're coming in and right, maybe they've never done an Olympic lift, but maybe they're already back squatting 180.
Sure.
If you have somebody like that, do you take a different approach or do you basically start them the same way?
I start the same way. It tends to be much faster. And if it's somebody who comes in and I ask them, I go through a whole kind of list of questions about, what their training experience is, if they did it maybe high school or some people just got off the couch. Last week they got off the couch and this is their first time in the gym in 20 years. But if it's somebody who's been training, say at a CrossFit gym,
Yeah.
and for whatever reason, maybe they moved, they changed jobs, and now they're coming into the gym for the first time and I'll ask them, what's your experience with the Olympic lifts, snatch and clean, and I'll take them for their word. They say, oh, I know how to snatch. I'll say, okay, let's start snatching. And sometimes it's awful. Sometimes it's very manageable. So it
Yeah.
doesn't you don't have to go through the wholesale process of starting with just the grip or starting with just placement overhead or starting just with
Sure.
overhead squat. Everything looks good, but maybe they're doing something very basic like uh, the bar gets away from them out front. So they don't really finish their second pull. The bar really loops around.
Yeah.
If that's the biggest problem they have, from a time standpoint, it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to spend all this time going back over everything they know. I can just fix that and then move
Right.
on. But if it is somebody who is who knows what the movement is, has done the movement in practice, but it just isn't that good. I'll start from the very beginning, and it may go quicker. So
Yeah.
kind of that example again of seminar where we start with overhead squat, hip snatch, hang snatch to the platform, and we have to get through it in a half hour for the seminar. That may literally take somebody through that in 10 or 15 minutes or less if they have experience doing the snatch and just kind of let's go through it, see what it looks like. And sometimes it's just a little bit mental. Maybe if they're in a new gym, they
Oh,
have
yeah.
somebody new standing next to them on the platform, and they're just a little bit afraid to do what they have been doing for so long.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny you said you take people at their word. You're a significantly nicer person than me. Somebody comes in and tells me they snatched before. I really don't believe them most of the time. I mean, I believe them that they've tried to snatch before. I get that, but but I tend to
Sure.
believe. Well, odds are you have what I call Swiss cheese knowledge,
Yeah.
where like you've got knowledge, but it may even from the outside, like if you wrapped it up in a bow or something, it looks like you've got a lot of knowledge there. But inside, there's all these holes and you're missing
Yeah.
pieces and things like that. And that's pretty standard and normal for someone who has not actually gone through some kind of progression with an Olympic lifting coach before. Um, because of course they just kind of picked up stuff here and there, and maybe
Sure.
their CrossFit club was like focusing on one thing, but they kind of just ignored everything else, and so uh, I kind of do. I mean, it sounds like we do basically the same thing. I start people at the beginning of the progression. It just may
Yeah.
happen that they'll fly through a significant portion of that,
Exactly.
and that may 5 minutes they're already on the floor with the bar.
Yep.
You know, uh, but at least if I start them at the beginning and I kind of run them through it, I can gauge and go, okay, oh, there's something that you don't get.
Sure.
You're obviously missing that. So let's
So
stay
let's
here for a
stop
second
there.
and we can take a step back. And that does seem to help a lot. I think as a rule, I don't know. I don't want to be one of those guys who puts everybody in two camps, but CrossFitters I think a lot of times come in basically these two camps where um, either they're far too strong for their ability
Yeah.
and they're sloppy. really, really sloppy, but they're ridiculously strong actually,
Mhm.
or kind of the opposite. And I think a lot of the females that I get in CrossFit are the opposite, where they're really not very strong. Uh, Other than like a more serious competitor, every once in a while we get people who are like trying to compete in the CrossFit Games, that kind of
Sure.
thing, and those women who come in are very strong and they're pretty good already. But the majority, the average CrossFitter that I tend to see, who men and women both, but I think a little bit more on the women's side, uh, have never done a lot of serious strength training before. Maybe the first time they ever did any strength training was CrossFit, whereas I think a lot of the guys spend a lot of years strength training first and then went to CrossFit.
Sure. Even if it's the wrong stuff, yeah.
Yeah, I
There's
mean,
been a long
if
period
nothing
of
else, they
time.
got a big bench press, the guys,
Yeah, yeah.
or
Spend some
something,
time in the park.
or a deadlift. Uh,
Sure.
but CrossFit is not in and of itself a very significant strength program. It's not bad for your first year or so because you're lifting weights and doing push-ups and things like that. So that's great. But obviously, you're not going to have a 200 kilo back squat, doing just that programming.
Sure.
Uh, but that does mean uh, sometimes that the females I'll find will very quickly become too efficient for their strength, which
Yeah.
is interesting. Like they're a little more naturally patient as a rule. I think we've talked about this before. Women, I think, just if we're taking a very general stance, tend to be a tad more patient, and that means they go through the progression faster because they
Sure.
spend a little time on the stuff that they're bad at longer.
Yep.
And so even though it looks like they might be going slower in a singular moment, they're actually going faster because they're fixing their problems early before
Yeah.
they become
It's not
ingrained and are a serious problem.
no, exactly.
And so that means it's very common actually in my gym for a lot of the female lifters to start cleaning as much or more than they can front squat. Like that
It's a
happens a lot. And that's
good.
really uncommon for the guys. The guys come in,
Yeah.
they're like front squatting triple what they could clean. you know?
Yeah, yeah, and honestly, a front squat triple what they can clean is for a lot of the guys that come from just a strength training background. That's a long way
It's a,
away. We'll have
yes.
guys that can uh, you know front squat 120 kilos and their best clean is 70 kilos because the bar is crashing down on them or they have
Yes. Yeah.
some issues. So we have to work a lot of technique stuff to kind of bring their efficiency up to what they can what they're strong enough to do. It's probably a good way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah. And even though I don't necessarily put a lot of credence into the sort of you look on the web, what are the ideal ratios of say my back squat to my clean to my snatch to my front
Mhm.
squat or whatever all that stuff. Partly for reasons that I think it's 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 not the same to say all these elite lifters tend to have these ratios, so therefore you should have these ratios, right? Like
Sure.
that's bad science. Uh, that's not understanding statistics very well, but it still is going to be fairly within a range of that for most people, simply because we're humans.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, Elite lifters are going to have better, nicer ratios than everybody else. Obviously, that's because they're elite lifters. But if you can front squat like 150 and you can't even snatch 80,
Yeah. That's a problem.
that's a real problem. uh, and that actually that happens. That absolutely happens with a lot of the guys. I think that happens even more so with guys who are maybe closer to the masters category. I think that's even more likely.
Just because of some mobility issues or some
Yeah,
flexibility issues.
right. Maybe
Sure.
they're picking up the nuance of technique a little slower,
Yep.
and that's fine. But it does mean I think from a practical standpoint on my end, it means I'll just spend a lot less time on the strength training stuff. With
Yep.
the females, a lot of times, after the first few weeks or so, if I'm noticing they're getting to that point where their technique actually doesn't look, it looks pretty decent. But what's going to really hold them back is that they're getting real close to their high end strength
Sure.
ability. We'll just squat them.
The
We'll squat
the
first in
yep.
every workout,
Yep.
just because I would rather them squat a lot and barely be able to even handle the Olympic lifts at the end and get stronger, and then we can go back and flip it. Whereas with a lot
Sure.
of the guys who are in the beginning, I could just have them not squat like
Yeah,
don't even do strength training, just snatch and clean.
yeah.
We just go to half-ass the squats at the end.
That's an interesting problem, and I see the same thing, and I think every gym in the country probably has the same approach where it's, you know, how much time do you spend addressing weaknesses, and how much time do you spend, working on their strengths? Because maybe it's not as extreme as the guy that can squat 150 but only snatches 80, but
Right.
there's a pretty big discrepancy, and or a guy that comes in and is, within the first week they can snatch 100 because they can squat 150. And it's like, well, the only reason they can snatch 100 is because they're so, they have silly leg strength
Yeah.
from all the squatting. So for me, it's like it's never 100% and zero, but it's finding that magic ratio. Okay,
Right.
so your leg strength that you develop through squatting is what allows you to come in and with limited practice snatch 100 kilos. So let's not stop that completely, but let's dial it down quite a bit. So
Right.
then maybe it's an 80-20 ratio. So it's like 80% technique work, 20% strength work, or it just kind of varies by individuals. But it's a unique problem to have, and I'd say by and large, it's people that are stronger than their lifts, when they're actually lifting the competition lifts. They just don't have the efficiency or the technique. But a very good problem to have is somebody who has to get stronger, only
Yeah.
because it's easier. And I
Right.
say that not to sound like, oh, it's easy, but if you have somebody that has a good ratio, or one of your examples you said of a female who can clean their front squats. I mean, even last week, I think I had a female in the gym whose best clean is like 37, and their best front squat's 42.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, knowing if,
That clean's not
if
going to go up. They'll get stronger. Yeah.
exactly, but that's again, it's not easy, but it's easier to just push their front squat weight up. You said you can have them front squat first. You can have them do extra front squats throughout the week. You can fix a lot of things with the strength side
Hmm.
much easier than you always can the technique side. Maybe technique is mobility, or maybe there's a learning problem, or there's that fear or apprehension. The
Yeah.
technique side is a lot more complicated. The strength side relatively is easier than just get stronger, put more weight on the bar, and do
Right.
it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, is not to sound overly simplistic, but work harder and do it more often. It really
Yeah,
does tend to work pretty well for strength training. When it comes to just pure strength gains, that does actually work pretty well. There's a little nuance here and there, but people. I had an email recently. Someone was asking me, some specific questions about, how do you get your lifter stronger and things like that, and how much time do you spend in the gym? And when I replied back, well, some of my lifters spend about 20 hours a week in the gym.
yeah,
They're like, what the heck? Like, the mystery is not a mystery per se. It's just they spend a ridiculous amount of time with a bar in their hands or on their back,
yeah.
and they really work hard when they do it. And that's pretty much the magic formula right there
It's
for strength training.
like
For the
any other.
technique, I think it is a little different because that you need it helps so much to have somebody watching you, or at least have
Sure.
a good guide in front of you, something that really helps you understand both the physical stuff and the mental stuff, like you're saying, the scariness of the
Sure.
snatch being overhead and flying there. That is quite frightening to do, and to finish your pull completely, to do that, to really finish that pull all the way, is itself a little scary because it feels like it's not going to happen.
Yeah, there you have guys that just have their arms are so much stronger than they. I mean, not stronger than their hips, but they feel more confident pulling the bar with their arms because they have strong arms just from years of strength training.
Right.
That they don't. You have to sell them on the fact that, trust me, your hips and your thighs and your glutes are way more stronger than your bicep. Right
Right.
now, you may feel better to bend your arms and kind of just arm pull it for a snatch or a clean, but just trust me on this, that if you can learn how to use your hips and get your hips the full extension, you're going to lift a lot more weight. So there's a little bit of
Yeah.
sales there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. It does make it a little tough. I was going to say too that again, from a practical standpoint for a coach, it's another thing that makes it easier to take a lifter who's already becoming kind of efficient, but is just not strong enough, is that they can do a lot of the strength work without you there.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So if I'm working with someone who's a CrossFitter and I only see him once or twice a week, and they spend all the rest of their workouts at their CrossFit gym, well, it's very easy for me to say, well, just front squat before you do your CrossFit workouts.
Sure.
I just do that every single day. Like, no big deal. Like,
Yep.
you can just front squat real hard. And that's going to result in progress. Whereas if I said to them, and they were kind of the opposite, I want you to practice your snatches every day before your wads. Well, the problem is I'm not there. And if
Yeah,
I'm not
you're
there, they might be practicing something bad.
yeah, I was gonna say you're kind of running the risk there of letting them do it on their own, just because it may offset everything you've worked on up to that point.
Exactly, yeah. And as a rule, I actually tell them not to snatch. I mean, don't do it unless I'm there. If I'm there, then we can do it. Otherwise, I don't want you to ingrain bad habits. Like, that's not good. Which, again, if you're listening to this and you're doing this on your own, that is a struggle. And I think the one of the key ways you can help yourself with that is just simply video everything that you do. So if you
Yeah.
videotape yourself and then you watch it back, you can go, whoa, that was horrible. Or, oh, that was a good one, and then at least you have some gauge. You need some gauge, or maybe you're lucky you have a training partner. You can basically coach each other. Because
Sure.
sometimes you just can't feel the difference between, a 1-inch movement this way or that way, and having at least something objective, either a video or a training partner, makes an enormous difference. And I think it's the risk of drilling bad behavior is very high, and it's a lot harder to unlearn a bad habit and then relearn a good habit than it is to go the other way around. And actually,
Sure.
this is definitely something that with every CrossFitter is going to be a little bit of a problem, because most CrossFitters have done snatches and cleans really badly, and maybe for like a year or two.
Yeah.
And so there might be a certain amount of unlearning that's going on.
It used to be the high school football kids that would come in with years of bad learning, so to speak. But now it's, but you know what? Some CrossFit gyms do an outstanding job. So I hate
Yeah, they
to
do. Yeah.
use that wide brush to kind of paint all, but just by nature of the sport of CrossFit, if you're doing 30 reps at a given weight,
Right. Which they
it's
did in
pretty
one of
safe
the
to say
recent
reps
ones. Yeah.
reps 20, 21, 22 aren't going to be as good as reps 1, 2, and 3, right?
Right.
And,
Right.
and that's where the problem I think comes in. I think fatigue it makes learning more difficult, because when fatigue sets in, you have to accommodate different things. So now you're accommodating different body positions, and if it's a light enough weight, instead of using your legs to push down through the platform to initiate the pull, you're just kind of bending over and doing a modified RDL or modified stiff leg deadlift to get the
Sure.
bar back to the hips, and that's not good learning. That's not good. That's not good practice.
Right. Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so uh, another thing we were thinking about was very specific kinds of. You mentioned earlier some drills. You said things like, drop snatches, things like that, to fix some problem here or there. Are there particular drills you come back to a lot that are very common to help, or rather, maybe there's very common problems you see that are regular, and there's a drill that fixes it? Or do you not necessarily have a lot of drills that you use?
I use a little drill called the snatch, and and
Yeah, I sort of baited you on
I
that one,
take
knowing
that
the
back.
answer.
I've been real lucky that the past few months that the gym I currently coach out of is owned by Dutch Lowy, and he's just a phenomenal athlete, phenomenal lifter, and we we agree on most everything. And one of the things he has really kind of opened my eyes to is more of like, call it the Soviet model of using different exercises to correct different things. And I came from a place where just, if your snatch is bad, just snatch more often or snatch heavier, and it'll fix itself. And I still believe that by and large, but there are situations where I have started using many more corrective type exercises, accessory type exercises, and I'm starting to really see the benefit. And for the longest time, I was against pulls. I thought pulls were kind of a waste, but I've started using pulls for a lot of lifters for various reasons. But I think beyond just doing the snatch and making sure it's coached correctly and everything's going good, I think just a very simple drill is, most people, if they have any problem off the floor, off the platform, the whole lift is going to be garbage. So I'll do a drill where it's, basically a pull to the knee, pause for a kind of a split second, and then, then do just a snatch pull. It's basically like a snatch grip deadlift, but you're finishing with the shoulders over top of the bar. And we just call it, snatch pull to the knee and then to the hip. And that's something that it's a pull. It's not done with weights, much heavier than what you would typically use in a snatch, but it's good to just practice and reinforce very basic movements. So off the floor, off the platform, feet are being pushed into the platform, right? You're extending the knee, you're getting the knees back out of the way, you're pulling the bar back into your body. So you're using your lats to kind of term somebody, it might have been Don McCauley, sweeping the bar back to the body. I use that same approach. So knees come back, bar comes back toward the body. So come up to the knee. It's not really a pause at the knee, but it's like a stop sign, right? So when you drive up to a stop sign, you have to come to a complete stop. It doesn't say you have to stop for 10 seconds, but all the wheels have to stop moving, and that's what I do at the knee. So we pause at the knee, everything to stop, and then we finish the pull by, again, using the lats and pulling the bar back into the body, and we finish with the shoulders over top the bar. So that's a good one. I like overhead squats. I like snatch grip push presses in the right dosage. I think certain times a year, I think that's a good way to give yourself a lot of confidence. You take somebody who is stuck at a 67 or 68 kilo snatch, and you have them do snatch grip push press plus overhead squat with 75, 75, 80 kilos. That gives them a lot of confidence to know that, what, I can put this overhead. Now it's just a matter of keeping it there and standing up with it in the overhead squat position.
Right.
So yeah, I do use some exercises, but it varies. I like the use of pulls in the right amount. Snatch grip push press, overhead squat for the snatch in the right amount. Uh, Drop snatch is a good warm up. I think that's a good way to kind of get the body moving and go through the right positions. But it's never anything I use a lot of weight on ever. You take somebody who's a 100-kilo snatcher and they're using 60 kilos in the drop snatch, that's plenty for me. It's just a warm up, just to kind of get your body moving fast and get your body moving under the bar in the right positions.
Yeah. I feel the same way
What
about the
about you?
drop.
I think we have similar mindset on the use of accessory exercises. But is
Yeah.
there anything you do offhand to correct different?
I mean, I absolutely have drills, especially in the beginner phase. Going through that whole progression, the beginner progression, I think splitting the lifts up a little bit obviously makes things helpful for a lifter just in terms of grasping what's actually happening in any one part, because there's a lot of movement going on. As time progresses, I think the number of drills drops and drops and drops for me. Although I have been getting really into pulls also. Even my more advanced lifters do pulls almost daily now.
Yep.
Not really anything complicated. I mean, it's just like you're doing, like, say, a clean, except you don't clean it. You just bring it to your hip, and that's about it. And I don't even make it a thing. Like some of them will really pop at the top and even shrug, and some won't. And I don't really care. I just want them to lift something heavy. Mostly I say lift it until it stops looking like a clean pull and starts looking like a deadlift, and then you're done. Like that's the stopping point. If you can't really make it look good anymore, that's your last rep.
I usually give them a number. I usually like to say, do your pulls at a given weight, just so I know they're not going to ever kind of cross that gap into making it a deadlift instead of a clean pull. And for me, it's like position of the shoulder, right? You never want to get the heavy deadlift. Once the bar gets past your knees, you're getting your shoulders behind the bar and just kind of locking it out. And in a clean pull,
almost immediately past the knees. Yeah, I mean they're basically doing a double knee bend, but they're doing it so early in the lift, the deadlifter, that it's just not good. Yeah, that's an interesting thing, that idea about the knees, because obviously when you look at like a high level lifter, that double knee bend that happens like the nanosecond before they finish the lift.
Yeah.
It's often so late that you don't even see it on the video unless you slow the video down.
You have to freeze it.
You have to freeze it in order to even see it.
Sure.
And sometimes on the first like 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it's good to over exaggerate, you know, like, okay, you do have to actually get your knees under the bar at some point and all of that. And I do teach that, but at a certain point, like if they are double knee bending too early, which is like what happens in a deadlift, it's just dramatically cutting down on the overall power and the positioning of the bar and everything else. And yeah, I'm with you on that. Like, as soon as the deadlift stops looking like, or not the deadlift, but the clean pull stops looking like a pull and starts looking like a deadlift, you gotta stop. And so, yeah, had another technical difficulty there. I think Michael was caught in a hurricane in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Maybe an alien attack. I don't know.
The University of Tulsa Golden Hurricanes.
That's what it was. Yeah, they just the football team trampled by. So yeah, we were really just wrapping up our discussion about different exercises that may or may not be used if you're struggling on a particular thing. I think we're both pretty similar in that we pull them out if they're needed. They're not always necessarily a guaranteed part of your program. I know, like if you look at like pdxweightlifting.com, I always like put up not totally consistently, but I do put up workouts of the day on there, and you'll notice they look remarkably similar almost every day. Snatches, clean and jerks, squats of some kind, and maybe some pulls. That's basically our entire schedule. But that doesn't mean that's all we ever do. There's definitely a lot of lifters who I go, well, you're a week overhead. We're going to have to do push presses for a while, or maybe we just need to do barbell rows, or, there's all kinds of things you can do as a lifter. It's going to come down to your own personal, what's going on with you? What do you personally need to fix? We'll get that fixed, and then we'll put you back in the system.
Sure.
I think that's my general philosophy on it.
I agree.
Although it does sound like you and I are we've broken with the Bulgarians a little bit in adding a lot of pulls.
Yeah.
John Rose does the same thing. John Rose is good. They do pulls every day.
Yeah. I don't necessarily do them every day, but I find they're a quick, easy way to kind of increase training volume. They don't. I mean, they're if you do them correctly, there's some technique involved, but they're not as technical as doing the lifts.
Yeah.
So it's a good way to train the basic same movement patterns, kind of overload certain portions of the lift,
Yeah.
and hopefully make a better weightlifter when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I was going to mention the kind of the Romanian deadlifts, which are probably my favorite hamstring exercise, just from a strength gaining standpoint, are so taxing, and they can knock it out of you so much that we only do them usually on like the last training day of the week.
Sure.
So like we usually will clean pull every day because that's easy because you drop the weight. It's just concentric only. Lift the weight up and then drop it. Lift the weight up and then drop it. No big deal. But on the last day of the week, then we'll do 3s or 5s or even 8s if I'm feeling crazy, on the Romanian deadlift. But that's about as complicated as it gets, though. I mean, as far as like fancy programming, in terms of like extra exercises and things like that. I think your initial point that if you want to get good at the snatch, you need to snatch still holds, even though at certain phases you may need to do something here or there that's a component of the snatch or something close to the component of the snatch. In the long run, if you added up all your training days, it would probably look like mostly you just snatch a lot.
Yeah.
I think that we're probably pretty.
I agree.
So we have a whole list of things we want to talk about. We'll get into on future podcasts. Lots of technical stuff.
That's why it's a weekly show, and
that's right.
We got plenty of stuff to talk about, and I enjoy our exchanges, and then every now and then I can pull out little sayings or little things, and I can go tell lifters or tell, even tell my students in class. And no, it's good, and I hope the listeners at home are getting something out of it. And as always, feedback, send it our way. Facebook page, hit us up on Facebook or post comments to the site when this is posted, and we read everything, and we try our best to get back to people and answer some questions.
Yeah, and if here we're talking about technical stuff and programming questions, all that kind of thing. You have any questions like that? We would love to tell us about it, and we'll talk about it on air. Actually, we'll get into answer the question for you. So again, Facebook.com/weightlifting academy. That's Facebook.com/weightlifting academy. You can also sign up at weightliftingacademy.com to get every single episode when it comes out every Wednesday. All right, man. Great talking to you.
As always, Nick, it's always a pleasure. Looking forward to it next week.
Right on, brother.
All right, man. See you.